into a wall 5 feet high. The door of each of these boxes has a hole in it through which the fowl can put its head, with a little sort of shutter that closes down on it. A fowl is placed in each bow. Then the attendants go around two together, one carries a basket filled with little balls of meal, the other lifts the shutter, and as the fowl puts its head out catches it by the neck, makes it open its beak, and with his other hand pushes the ball of meal down its throat. They are so skillful that the operation takes scarce a moment. Then they go on to the next, and so on down the long rows until they have fed the last of those under their charge. Then they begin again afresh." "Why do they keep them in the dark?" the fowler asked. "They told us that they did it because in the dark they were not restless, and slept all the time between their meals. Then each time the flap is lifted they think it is daylight, and pop out their heads at once to see. In about 10 days they get quite fat and plump, and are ready for market." "It seems a wonderful deal of trouble," the fowler said; "but I suppose as they have a fine market close at hand, and can get good prices, it pays them. It seems more reasonable to me than the hatching business. Why they should not let the fowls hatch their own eggs is more than I can imagine." "Fowls will lay a vastly greater number of eggs than they will hatch," Chebron said. "A well fed fowl should lay 250 eggs in the year, and left to herself she will not hatch more than 2 broods of 15 eggs in each. Thus you see, as it pays the peasants much better to rear fowls than to sell eggs, it is to their profit to send their eggs to the hatching places, and so get 125 chickens a year instead of 30. "I suppose it does," the fowler agreed. "But here we are, my lord, at the end of our journey. There is the point where we are to land, and your servant who hired us is standing there in readiness for you. I hope that you are satisfied with your day's sport." Chebron said that they had been greatly pleased, and in a few minutes the boat reached the landing place, where Rabah was awaiting them. One of the fowlers, carrying a dozen of the finest fowl they had killed, accompanied them to the spot Rabah had chosen for the encampment. Like the last, it stood at the foot of the sandhills, a few hundred yards from the lake. "Is the place where we are going to hunt near here?" was Chebron's first question. "No, my lord, it is 2 miles away. But in accordance with your order last night I have arranged for you to fish tomorrow. In the afternoon I will move the tents a mile nearer to the country where you will hunt, but it is best not to go too close, for near the edge of these great swamps the air is unhealthy to those who are not accustomed to it." "I long to get at the hunting," Chebron said; "but it is better, as you say, to have the day's fishing first, for the work would seem tame after the excitement of hunting the river horse. We shall be glad of our dinner as soon as we can get it, for although we have done justice to the food you put on board, we are quite ready again. 12 hours of this fresh air from the sea gives one the appetite of a hyena." "Everything is already in readiness, my lord. I thought it better not to wait for the game you brought home, which will do well tomorrow, and so purchased fish and fowl from the peasants. As we have seen your boat for the last 2 or 3 hours, we were able to calculate the time of your arrival, and thus have everything in readiness." The dinner was similar to that on the previous day, except that a hare took the place of the venison, a change for the better, as the hare was a delicacy much appreciated by the Egyptians. The following day was spent in fishing. For this purpose a long net was used, and the method was precisely similar to that in use in modern times. One end of the net was fastened to the shore, the net itself being coiled up in the boat. This was rowed out into the lake, the fishermen paying out the net as it went. A circuit was then made back to the shore, where the men seized the 2 ends of the net and hauled it to land, capturing the fish inclosed within its sweep. After seeing 2 or 3 hauls made, the lads went with Jethro on board the boat. They were provided by the fishermen with long 2-pronged spears. The boat was then quietly rowed along the edge of the rushes, where the water was deeper than usual. It was, however, so clear that they could see to the bottom, and with their spears they struck at the fish swimming there. At first they were uniformly unsuccessful, as they were ignorant that allowance must be made for diffraction, and were puzzled at finding that their spears instead of going straight down at the fish they struck at, seemed to bend off at an angle at the water's edge. The fishermen, however, explained to them that an allowance must be made for this, the allowance being all the greater the distance the fish was from the boat, and that it was only when it lay precisely under them that they could strike directly at it. But even after being instructed in the matter they succeeded but poorly, and presently laid down their spears and contented themselves with watching their boatmen, who rarely failed in striking and bringing up the prey they aimed at. Presently their attention was attracted to 4 boats, each containing from 6 to 8 men. 2 had come from either direction, and when they neared each other volleys of abuse were exchanged between their occupants. "What is all this about?" Chebron asked as the 2 fishermen laid by their spears, and with faces full of excitement turned round to watch the boats. "The boats come from 2 villages, my lord, between which at present there is a feud arising out of some fishing nets that were carried away. They sent a regular challenge to each other a few days since, as is the custom here, and their champions are going to fight it out. You see the number of men on one side are equal to those on the other, and the boats are about the same size." Amuba and Jethro looked on with great interest, for they had seen painted on the walls representations of these fights between boatmen, which were of common occurrence, the Egyptians being a very combative race, and fierce feuds being often carried on for a long time between neighboring villages. The men were armed with poles, some 10 feet in length, and about 1.5 inches in diameter, their favorite weapons on occasions of this kind. The boats had now come in close contact, and a furious battle at once commenced, the clattering of the sticks, the heavy thuds of the blows, and the shouts of the combatants creating a clamor that caused all the waterfowl within a circle of half a mile to fly screaming away across the lake. The men all used their heavy weapons with considerable ability, the greater part of the blows being warded off. Many, however, took effect, some of the combatants being knocked into the water, others fell prostrate in their boats, while some dropped their long staves after a disabling blow on the arm. "It is marvelous that they do not all kill each other," Jethro said. "Surely this shaving of the head, Amuba, which has always struck us as being very peculiar, has its uses, for it must tend to thicken the skull, for surely the heads of no other men could have borne such blows without being crushed like water jars." That there was certainly some ground for Jethro's supposition is proved by the fact that Herodotus, long afterward writing of the desperate conflicts between the villagers of Egypt, asserted that their skulls were thicker than those of any other people. Most of the men who fell into the water scrambled back into the boats and renewed the fight, but some sank immediately and were seen no more. At last, when fully half the men on each side had been put hors de combat, 4 or 5 having been killed or drowned, the boats separated, no advantage resting with either party, and still shouting defiance and jeers at each other, the men poled in the direction of their respective villages. "Are such desperate fights as these common?" Chebron asked the fishermen. "Yes, there are often quarrels," one of them replied, quietly resuming his fishing as if nothing out of the ordinary way had taken place. "If they are waterside villages their champions fight in boats, as you have seen. If not, equal parties meet at a spot halfway between the villages and decide it on foot. Sometimes they fight with short sticks, the hand being protected by a basket hilt, while on the left arm a piece of wood, extending from the elbow to the tips of the fingers, is fastened on by straps serving as a shield. But more usually they fight with the long pole, which we call the neboot." "It is a fine weapon," Jethro said, "and they guard their heads with it admirably, sliding their hands far apart. If I were back again, Amuba, I should like to organize a regiment of men armed with those weapons. It would need that the part used as a guard should be covered with light iron to prevent a sword or axe from cutting through it, but with that addition they would make splendid weapons, and footmen armed with sword and shield would find it hard indeed to repel an assault by them." "The drawback would be," Amuba observed, "that each man would require so much room to wield his weapon that they must stand far apart, and each would be opposed to 3 or 4 swordsmen in the enemy's line." "That is true, Amuba, and you have certainly hit upon the weak point in the use of such a weapon; but for single combat, or the fighting of broken ranks, they would be grand. When we get back to Thebes, if I can find any peasant who can instruct me in the use of these neboots, I will certainly learn it." "You ought to make a fine player," one of the fishermen said, looking at Jethro's powerful figure. "I should not like a crack on the head from a neboot in your hands. But the sun is getting low, and we had best be moving to the point where you are to disembark." "We have had another capital day, Rabah," Chebron said when they reached their new encampment. "I hope that the rest will turn out as successful." "I think that I can promise you that they will, my lord. I have been making inquiries among the villagers, and find that the swamp in the river bed abounds with hippopotami." "How do you hunt them, on foot?" "No, my lord. There is enough water in the river bed for the flat boats made of bundles of rushes to pass up.